Welcome to the very important lecture, User Stories in Scrum. User stories are short, simple description of features told from the perspective of the person who desires the new capability, usually user or customer of the system. Product backlog items are frequently stated as user stories, as a concept that originates in extreme programming, or XP. A user story is a way of expressing the business need in a particular fashion, to answer the questions of who, what, and why. Though many people use the concept of user story, but it is by no means required, and it is no an official part of the Scrum framework. A handy way of thinking about the user story is 3C. So cards, conversation, and confirmation. So in the early days of extreme programming, which is another agile approach, user stories were written on physical note cards, either 3x5 or 4x6 inches. The cards could be laid out on table, they could be stored and prioritized, and even be passed around in discussion in the meeting. So one key benefit of the note card approach was that teams were forced to make stories very small to be able to put them on the card. It also prevented a lot of details from being recorded since there just wasn't much space for it. And cards were low cost, flexible, and lightweight. The second C of user story represents conversation. With the agile ways of working in general, and user stories in particular, the idea is to rely on discussion to get a common understanding and not on documentation. So the card and user stories were a reminder to have a conversation about the story. The product owner and team would meet and discuss the story. Conversation replaced the detailed documentation. And some teams might find it necessary to write something down. And that's okay. But many teams find documents unnecessary if they have small user stories and conversation with the product owner about the business needs. And the final C represents confirmation. Confirmation means the test or acceptance criteria that will be used to determine whether we achieved the story or not. By being with the end in mind, we make sure we all agree on what we are going to build. And traditionally, the acceptance criteria were written on the back side of the physical cards. Let's see how it looks like. Now let's see user story characteristics. They're independent. User stories should be independent of each other as much as possible. And that is, they can be moved around in the backlog and developed separately. Negotiable. The user story should not represent a contract between developers and the product owner. Rather, it should represent a business need, and the team can negotiate with the product owner on the best way to satisfy that business need. Valuable. This probably goes without saying, but each user story should deliver some value to the end user. Estimable. Teams should be able to estimate the user story. If they cannot, the user story is either unclear or too large. Small or sized appropriately. The small user story are easy to plan and low risk. As I mentioned earlier, teams are more productive when stories are small and evenly sized. And lastly, testable. The user story should be written in such a way that the test can be developed and the team can validate that the user story has been developed correctly. They typically follow a simple template as this one you can see on your screen. As a type of user, I want some goal, so that some reason or some benefit. Now let's see one real example of a user story. As a customer, I want to be able to select the payment method so that I can choose the most convenient one. Now let's talk for a second how to write a better user stories. Frequently, Teams have difficulty getting user stories small enough and sufficient specific. Developing a good user story is the job of the product owner. Writing user stories so that they are explicit and granular needs to be done in close collaboration with the Scrum Master and team. Good, achievable user stories may be most important valuable in the sprint velocity. Often, user stories may have multiple functions embedded in them. In Scrum, these are called epics. So from a product owner's point of view, revenue comes from large pieces of functionality that can be shipped to the customer. However, for implementation, epics need to be broken down into multiple stories. So slicing user stories so they are valuable and actionable is collaborative work involving product owners, Scrum Master, and developers. So take your time and learn how to slice a user stories in return. It will accelerate ongoing backlog refinement, and it will help you with release planning, and it will increase delivering value. Now let's talk about user story estimation. In Scrum, the product owner is responsible for prioritizing the product backlog and ordered list of work that contains short description of all desired features and fixes for a product. Product owners capture requirements from the business. Then they don't always understand the details of the implementation. So the good estimation can give the product owner new insights into the level of effort for each work item, which then feeds back into their assessment of each item's relative priority. When developers begin their estimation process, questions usually arise about requirements and user stories. Those questions help the entire team understand the work more fully. Involving everyone, developers, designers, testers, etc., on the team is vital. Each team member brings a different perspective on the product and the work required to deliver a user story. For example, if management wants to do something that they seem very simple, like supporting a new web browser, development and Q&A need to weigh in because their experience has taught them what dragons may be lurking beneath the surface. Leaving part of the broader product team out of the estimation process creates lower quality estimates, lower morale because key contributors don't feel included, and compromises the quality of the product. So my suggestion for you is don't let your team fall victim to estimates made in vacuum. It's fast track to the failure. Now, traditionally, software teams give estimates in time format, like days, weeks, months, etc. But many agile teams, however, moved to story points. Story points rate the relative effort of work in Fibonacci-like format. 0, 0.5, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, 40, and 100. For example, 1.5 story point stands for half a day of work, and 1 story point stands for 1 day of work. Okay, now we have one technique that I want to show you. It's called planning poker. So remember that story points are relative value, not absolute. There is no direct correlation between hours and points. Story points are created and are specific to the team that estimates them and will likely include a degree of complexity that is understood only by the team doing the estimating. So the estimation process will be facilitated by the Scrum Master, and the product owner reads the user story together with the condition of satisfaction of the team and begins conversation to put the user story in the context. The product owner will answer questions, clarify expectations, and provide explanation about what exactly this story entails. The Scrum Master can add these details as discussion proceeds and jot down things to be remembered when implementing this story. And this can be bullet point on the story cards, what we will have to learn before we start working on this user story. Coding. How much code will need to be written for this story? And have we written similar code before? Testing. Will any specific mockup, which is mock data, objects, etc., will require to unit test this user story. Integration points. Does this user story have external dependencies? And expertise. Has any one of us done a similar user story before? Note that above discussion should not be taken more than several minutes per user story. Newly formed teams may take longer in the beginning. To begin relative estimating the user story, every team member pulls out estimated card so no one else can see it, and after everyone has picked out estimate cards, they are revealed at the same time. If everyone is holding the same number from Fibonacci sequence, we are done and we have our estimates. And this is established as a relative estimate of the story. But if estimated cards are different, we have to discuss it. Now let's look at this example of our member team who holds up 3, 5, 8, and 13. At this point, we want to hear from the outliers 3 and 13, why 3 and why 13. So everyone from the team who will participate in completing the story can talk and ask questions. The team member holding the 13 could say, well, I'm developer and this is going to be hard to code. I need to set up a database, set up the environment, and so on. The team member holding the 3 could say, you're right, I'm going to come up in my estimates, but I've done this type of coding before and it's not that hard. After everyone has a chance to talk, each team member picks a number again from the card desk, and then all at once the cards are revealed. At this time, let's say that we get 8, 8, 8, and 13. At this point, the Scrum Master will ask the team member holding the number 13 to explain why 13. If agreeable to the team, everyone switches to the 13. This is not a vote, and majority does not rule the team. The team members keep going until the consensus is reached. Sometimes the consensus will not be made, and in that case the Scrum Master will decide how to handle these situations. Once the team agrees on the estimate, the Scrum Master will mark the user story with the estimated number, and the product owner will pull it back on the backlog in no particular order. And that is it. Later on in this masterclass, you will see planning poker in real life. Let's continue.